All right, here we go. Master Margarita, Chapter 10, News from Yalta. At the moment when disaster struck Nikanor Ivanovich, two men sat in the office of the financial manager of the Variety Theater, which was also on Sadova, not far from number 302B. They were the financial manager Rimsky and the house manager Varinucha. The large office on the second floor of the theater building had two windows looking out at Sadova and one directly behind Rimsky's desk on the theater's summer garden with its refreshment bars, shooting gallery, and outdoor stage. Besides the desk, the office furnishings consisted of a bundle of old playbills hanging on the wall, a small table on which stood a carafe filled with water, 4 armchairs, and a pedestal in the corner supporting an ancient, dusty model of some set. And naturally, there was also a small, battered, peeling fireproof safe. It stood on Rimsky's left, next to the desk. Rimsky had been in bad humor since early morning. Varinucha, on the contrary, was cheerful, but somehow restless and overactive. Yet there was no outlet for his energy. Varinucha had taken refuge in the financial manager's office to escape from the seekers of free passes, who were the bane of his existence, especially during the periods of program changes. And today was just such a day. Every time the telephone rang, Varinucha would pick up the receiver and lie into it. Who? Varinucha? He's not here. He stepped out somewhere. Will you please call Likhadeev again? Rimsky begged irritably. He isn't home. I've sent Karpov over. There is no one in the apartment. The devil knows what's going on, Rimsky hissed, clicking away on his adding machine. The door opened, and the head usher dragged in a thick bundle of freshly printed additional playbills. The green sheets announced in bold red letters. Today and every day at the Variety Theater, extra attraction, in addition to regular program, Professor Voland and his Black Magic Act, accompanied by a full expose. Varinucha stepped away from the playbill he had spread over the model, admired it, and ordered the usher to have all the copies posted up. Good. Very striking. He remarked after the man had gone. Well, I don't care for this business at all, Rimsky grumbled, glancing at the playbill angrily through his horn-rimmed glasses. And anyway, I wonder how they allowed him to present it. Oh no, Grigory Danilovich, don't say that. It is a very clever move. The whole point of it is the expose. I don't know. To my mind, there is no point in it at all. He'll always think of something mad. At least if he had shown up this magician, did you see him? Where did he dig him up, anyway? It turned out that Varinucha had not seen the magician either. The day before, Styopa had rushed in, like a maniac to use Rimsky's expression, with a rough draft of the contract, ordered it typed out, and told the financial manager to issue Voland's pay. And the magician kept out of sight. No one had seen him, except Styopa himself. Rimsky took out his watch, which showed 5 minutes past 2, and lost his temper altogether. Really, Likhadeev had called at about 11 and said that he would come in half an hour, yet he not only failed to show up, but disappeared from his apartment. He's holding up all my work, Rimsky growled, poking his finger at the pile of unsigned papers. Could he have fallen under a streetcar like Berlioz? Wondered Varinucha, holding the receiver to his ear and listening to the long, insistent, and utterly hopeless ringing. Would be a good thing, Rimsky muttered almost inaudibly through his teeth. At this moment, a woman entered the office. She wore a uniform jacket and cap and black skirt and sneakers. From a pouch in her belt, she took out a small white square and a notebook and asked, "Where is Variety around here? Telegram. Sign for it." Varinucha scrawled something illegible in the woman's notebook, and as soon as the door closed behind her, he opened the square. He read the telegram, blinked, and turned it over to Rimsky. The telegram bore the following message. Yalta, Moscow Variety. 11:30 today, brown-haired man in nightshirt trousers without shoes appeared Criminal Investigation Office, Psycho calls himself Likhadeev, Director Variety Theater, Wire Yalta, Police Holding, Director Likhadeev. Well, I'll be damned. Another surprise, exclaimed Rimsky. A false Dmitri, said Verenucha, and spoke into the telephone receiver. Telegraph office? Variety account. Take an urgent telegram. Are you listening? Yalta Criminal Investigation Office. Director Likhadeev, Moscow. Financial Manager Rimsky. Disregarding the news of the Yalta impostor, Verenucha resumed his search for Styopa by telephone and naturally did not find him anywhere. Just as Verenucha, receiver in hand, was wondering where else he might call, the same woman came in and handed him another envelope. Hastily opening it, Verenucha read the message and whistled. What now? Rimsky asked with a nervous twitch. Verenucha silently gave them the telegram, and the financial manager read, Implore you, believe, throne Yalta Voland's hypnosis, wire police confirm identity Likhadeev. Rimsky and Verenucha, their heads touching, read the telegram again, and having read it, stared at one another in silence. Citizens, the woman scolded, sign for it, then you can sit here without a word as long as you please. I have telegrams to deliver. Verenucha scrawled something in her notebook without taking his eyes from the telegram, and the woman vanished. But you spoke to him about 11, the house manager asked in a total bewilderment. Ridiculous! Rimsky's voice rose to a scream. Whether I spoke to him or didn't speak to him, he cannot be in Yalta now. Absurd! He must be drunk, said Verenucha. Who is drunk? Asked Rimsky, and the two stared at each other again. There was no question that some impostor or madman had wired from Yalta. But there was something strange about it all the same. How did the impersonator in Yalta know Voland, who had just arrived in Moscow the day before? How did he know about the link between Likhadeev and Voland? Hypnosis. Verenucha repeated the word from the telegram. But how did he learn about Voland? He blinked and suddenly exclaimed emphatically, No, ridiculous nonsense. Where is he staying, this Voland? The devil take him, asked Rimsky. Verenucha immediately telephoned the in-tourist office, and to Rimsky's utter astonishment reported that Voland was staying at Likhadeev's apartment. After that, he dialed Likhadeev's number and listened for a long time to the dense signals in the receiver. In the midst of these signals, he suddenly heard a heavy, gloomy voice singing, Cliffs are my refuge, and decided that a voice from some radio stations had somehow cut in on the line. No one answers, said Verenucha, putting down the receiver. Perhaps I ought to try again? He did not finish the sentence. The same woman appeared in the door, and both Rimsky and Verenucha rose to meet her. This time, she took a dark sheet from her pouch. This is becoming interesting. Verenucha drawled through his teeth, following the hastily departing woman with his eyes. Rimsky was the first to take possession of the sheet. Against the dark background of the photographic paper, the written lines stood out clearly. Proof my handwriting, my signature, wire confirmation, establish secret surveillance, Voland, Likhadeev. During his 20 years in the theater, Verenucha had seen enough strange things, but now he felt as though a mist were clouding his brain, and all he could bring forth was the trite and totally absurd phrase, This cannot be. Rimsky reacted differently. He got up, opened the door, and barked at the theater messenger sitting on a stool. Don't let anyone in except mail carriers. And he turned the key in the lock. Then he took a pile of papers from his desk and began to compare the bold slanting letters in the photogram with the letters of Styopa's resolutions and signatures, ending in the same whirly flourish. Verenucha leaned against the desk, breathing hotly on Rimsky's cheek. It is his handwriting, the financial manager finally said in firm tones, and Verenucha echoed, His? Staring closely at Rimsky's face, Verenucha was amazed at the change in it. Usually gaunt, it seemed to have become still more drawn and somehow older, and the eyes behind the horn rims had lost their customary waspish look. Now they expressed anxiety and even sorrow. Verenucha did everything that is usually done in moments of great stress. He ran from corner to corner, lifted his arms twice like a man crucified, and gulped down a whole glass of yellowish water from the carafe, exclaiming over and over, "I don't understand it! I don't understand it! I don't understand it!" Rimsky, meantime, stared out the window, thinking hard. The financial manager was in a very difficult position. He felt obliged to invent at once, right on the spot, some ordinary explanation for extraordinary events. Squinting, Rimsky imagined Styopa in a nightshirt and without boots, climbing that very morning at about 11:30 into some unheard-of superplane, and then also at 11:30, standing in his socks at the airport in Yalta. The devil alone could make head or tail of it. But perhaps it was not Styopa who had telephoned from his apartment this morning. No, it was certainly Styopa. He could not possibly mistake that voice. And even if it had been someone else that morning, it was only last night that Styopa had marched into this very office with that idiotic contract and irritated Rimsky with his flighty irresponsibility. How could he have gone off without saying anything at the theater? And even if he had taken a plane last night, he would not have reached Yalta by noon today, or would he? "How many kilometers is it from here to Yalta?" Rimsky asked. Verenucha stopped his running and shouted, I thought of that too. It's 1,500 kilometers to Sevastopol by train, and 80 more to Yalta, but of course it is less by air." Yes. Trains were out of the question, but what then? A fighter plane? But who would admit Styopa without boots into a fighter plane? And what for? Or perhaps he removed his boots when he came to Yalta? Again, what for? But then they would not have let him in with boots either. Besides, what has a fighter plane to do with it anyway? The telegram said that he appeared at the Criminal Investigation Office at 11:30 in the morning, and he had spoken to Rimsky in Moscow by telephone. Let's see. Rimsky clearly saw in his mind the face of his watch at the time. He recalled the position of the hands. It had been 20 after 11. What did it mean then? If Styopa had rushed to the airport immediately after their conversation and had reached it, say, in 5 minutes, which incidentally could not be done either, this meant that the plane, if it took off at once, covered more than 1,000 kilometers in 5 minutes. More than 12,000 kilometers an hour. That was impossible. Consequently, Styopa was not in Yalta. What remained? Hypnosis? There was no hypnosis in the world that could fling a man across a distance of 1,000 kilometers. Hence, he only imagined that he was in Yalta. Well, Styopa might perhaps imagine it, but what about the Yalta police? Did they imagine it too? Oh no, forgive me, but such things don't happen. And yet they wired from Yalta? The face of the financial manager was terrible to behold. Meantime, someone was violently pulling and twisting the door handle outside, and they heard the messenger. Cried desperately, "You can't. I won't allow you. Not if you kill me. There is conference there." Rimsky took himself in hand as best as he could, picked up the telephone and said, "Give me Yalta. It's urgent." Clever, Verenucha exclaimed to himself. But the conversation with Yalta did not take place. Rimsky put down the receiver and said, as if in spite, "The line is out of order." It was evident that the breakdown of the line particularly upset him, and it made him wonder still more. After a while, he lifted the receiver again with one hand and began to write down what he was saying with the other. "Take an urgent wire. Variety Theater. Yes. Yalta Police. Yes. Today, about 11:30, Likhadeyev telephoned me in Moscow. Stop. After that, failed come office and cannot find by phone. Stop. Confirm handwriting. Stop. Taking steps surveillance over said artist. Financial manager Rimsky." Very clever, thought Verenucha. But before he finished the thought, the words flashed through his mind. Stupid, he cannot be in Yalta. Meanwhile, Rimsky neatly folded all the telegrams received that day, put them, together with a copy of his own, into an envelope, sealed it, wrote several words on it, and gave it to Verenucha, saying, "Ivan Savelyevich, Take them over at once. Let them look into it. That is really clever, thought Verenucha, and put the envelope into his briefcase. Then, just in case, he dialed Styopa's number again, listened, and began to wink mysteriously and grimace to indicate his joy. Rimsky craned his neck. "May I speak to the artist, Voland?" Verenucha asked in sugary tones. "They're busy," the receiver replied in a quavering voice. "Who wants him?" "The house manager of the Variety Theater, Verenucha." "Ivan Savelyevich!" the receiver cried joyously. "I am delighted to hear your voice. How is your health?" "Merci," Verenucha answered with astonishment. "And who is that?" His assistant and interpreter, Koroviev." The receiver chattered. "I am all at your service, my most charming Ivan Savelyevich. Command me as you wish." "And so?" "Excuse me, is Stepan Bogdanovich Likhadeyev out at the moment?" "Alas, he is out, the receiver screamed. "He is gone." "Where?" "Out of town for a ride in the car." What? A ride? And when will he be back?" "He said, 'I'll get some fresh air, then I'll come back.'" "Oh," Verenucha said, unnerved. "Merci. Be kind enough to tell Monsieur Voland that he appears today in a third section of the program." "Yes, of course, certainly, immediately. Most assuredly I will," the receiver rapped out in staccato rhythm. "Good day," Verenucha said in amazement. "I beg you," the receiver went on, "to accept my best, my warmest greetings and wishes. Good luck, many successes, all happiness. Goodbye." "You see, I said so," the house manager shouted excitedly. "He's not in Yalta. He went for a ride out of town." "Well, if that is so," the financial manager said, paling with anger, "it is a swinish trick beyond description." Verenucha suddenly jumped and gave a shout that made Rimsky start. "I know! I just remembered! A Yalta restaurant has opened recently in Pushkino. Chibureki lamb pies. He got himself cockeyed drunk and keeps sending telegrams from there." "Well, that is too much," Rimsky answered, his cheek twitching and his eyes burning with heavy hatred. "He'll pay a price for this little outing." And suddenly he tripped and added hesitantly, "But the Criminal Investigation Office?" "Absurd! His own tricks!" interrupted the effusive box office manager and asked, "Shall I take the papers over anyway?" "Certainly," answered Rimsky. And now the door opened again and the same woman came in. Again, Rimsky thought with a sinking heart, and both rose to meet her. This time the telegram said, "Thanks, confirmation wire, 500 police for me leaving tomorrow, Likhadeyev." "He's gone mad," Verenucha said weakly. But Rimsky clicked with his keys, took the money out of the safe, counted off 500 rubles, rang, gave the messenger the money, and ordered him to take it to the telegraph office. "In heaven's name, Grigory Danilovich," Verenucha said, disbelieving his eyes, "I think you're sending it for nothing." "It will come back," Rimsky spoke quietly, "but he'll answer for this little picnic." And he added, pointing to Verenucha's briefcase, "Go, Ivan Savelyevich. Don't delay." Verenucha ran out of the office with the briefcase. He went downstairs, saw the longest queue at the box office, and learned from the cashier that she expected to sell out within an hour. There was a rush for tickets since they had posted the additional playbills. He ordered the cashier to hold back the 30 best seats in the lodges. An orchestra ran out of the box office, fought off the importunate seekers of passes, and dived into his own little cubicle to pick up his cap. Just then the telephone rang. "Yes," cried Verenucha. "Ivan Savelyevich?" the receiver inquired in a most repulsive nasal voice. "He's not in the theater," Verenucha began, but the receiver immediately interrupted him. "Quit fooling, Ivan Savelyevich, and listen. Do not take those telegrams anywhere, and do not show them to anyone." "Who is speaking?" roared Verenucha. "Stop those tricks, citizen. You'll be discovered at once. What's your number?" "Verenucha," the same vile voice responded. "Do you understand Russian? Do not take the telegrams anywhere." "Oh, so you won't stop it?" the manager shouted in rage. "Look out, you'll pay for this." He shouted some other threat, but broke off, sensing that no one was listening to him any longer in the receiver. It suddenly began to turn very dark in the office. Verenucha ran out, slammed the door behind him, and hurried through the side entrance to the summer garden. He was excited and full of energy. After that impudent call, he was certain that a gang of hooligans was playing nasty tricks, and that those tricks were connected with Likhadeyev's disappearance. He choked with an angry desire to expose the scoundrels, but strangely, as it often happens when a man hopes to become the center of attention, to announce a piece of sensational news, there was also a sense of pleasant anticipation. In the garden, a blast of wind blew sand into Verenucha's eyes, as though to warn him or to bar his way. A window on the second floor banged so violently that the panes were nearly shattered, and the crowns of the maples and lindens rustled uneasily. The air darkened and turned chilly. The manager rubbed his eyes and saw a yellow storm cloud creeping low over Moscow. Something growled thickly in the distance. Despite his haste, Verenucha was suddenly overcome by an irresistible impulse to step for a moment into the summer toilet to make sure the electrician had put a net over the bulb. He ran past the shooting gallery and dived into the dense thicket of lilac which screened the pale blue toilet building. The electrician turned out to have been a conscientious man, and the bulb in the man's room was already shielded with a metal net. But the manager was distressed to see, even in the darkness before the storm, that the walls were already covered with scrolls in charcoal and pencil. "What sort of?" the manager began when a voice purred behind him. "Is that you, Ivan Savelyevich?" Verenucha started, turned, and saw a short, podgy man with what looked like a cat face. "Well, yes," Verenucha replied grudgingly. "Very, very pleased," the cat-like roly-poly said in a squeaky voice, and suddenly swung out and landed Verenucha a blow on the ear that made the cap fly off the manager's head and vanish in the opening of the toilet seat. The blow filled the man's room for an instant with a quivering flash of light, and the sky echoed with a clap of thunder. Then there was another flash, and a second man appeared before the manager, small, but with athletic shoulders, with fiery red hair, one eye clouded by a cataract, a fang projecting from his mouth. The second one, who was evidently left-handed, cuffed the manager on the other ear. Again there was an answering crash in the sky, and a cloudburst came down upon the wooden roof of the toilet. "What are you doing? Come," whispered the half-crazed manager, but realized at once that the word comrades was scarcely suitable for bandits attacking a man in a public toilet, and began to gurgle, "Cities," but just as it occurred to him that they did not deserve this designation either, he received a third frightful blow, he was not sure from which one, that made the blood spurt from his nose down on his Tolstoy blouse. "What do you have in your briefcase, parasite?" shrilled the one who looked like a cat. "Telegrams? Were you warned by telephone not to take them anywhere? Were you warned, I ask you?" "I was warned," the manager stuttered, gasping. "But you ran out all the same. Hand me the briefcase, scum," the second one cried in the same nasal voice that had come earlier over the telephone, and tore the briefcase from Verenucha's shaking hands. Then the two seized the manager under the arms, dragged him out of the garden, and rushed down Sadovaya with him. The storm raged with full force. Water gushed, booming and clattering into sewer holes. Waves swelled and bubbled everywhere. Sheets of rain lashed from the roofs past drain pipes. Foaming rivers streamed from under gateways. Everything living had been washed away from Sadovaya, and there was no one to rescue Ivan Savelyevich. Within a second, leaping through the muddy torrents, lit up fitfully by lightning flashes, the bandits brought the half-dead manager to house number 302B and dived into the gateway, where two barefoot women huddled with their shoes and stockings in their hands. Then they dashed to entrance number 6, and the almost insane Verenucha was pulled up to the 5th floor and flung down on the floor of the familiar hallway of Stepa Likhadeyev's apartment. Instantly, both hoodlums vanished, and in their place, a totally naked woman, red-haired, with burning phosphorescent eyes, appeared before the manager. Verenucha realized that this was the most frightful of all the things that had befallen him that afternoon. He moaned and sprang back against the wall. And the woman came up close to the manager and laid her palms upon his shoulders. Verenucha's hair stood up, for even through the cold and water-soaked fabric of his Tolstoy blouse, he felt that those palms were still colder, that they were cold as ice. "Let me kiss you," the woman said tenderly, and the blazing eyes were brought right up against his own. Verenucha fainted and never felt the kiss. End of chapter 10.